December 31st, 2014, from the Sun Life Stadium in Miami, Florida. It was the Orange Bowl between the Mississippi State Bulldogs and the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. The Bulldogs would get the ball first after the opening kickoff. They had it on their own 25. They're then faced with a 3rd and 3 from the 32. Dak Prescott dropped back to pass. He was intercepted by Chris Milton. And so now the Yellow Jackets would take over on the Mississippi State 36 with less than a minute off the clock in the first quarter. They would bring the ball into the red zone, and on 1st and goal from the 3, they give it to Synjyn. He ran it in from 3 yards out to put the first points on the scoreboard with the score: Georgia Tech 7, Mississippi State 0. So now the Bulldogs take over on their own 19 after the kickoff with about 12.5 left in the first. They would bring the ball across midfield and into Georgia Tech territory. They'd end up being faced with a 4th and 4 from the Georgia Tech 32. They elected to go for it, and an incomplete pass would turn the ball over on downs. So now Georgia Tech would take over on their own 32 with about 9.5 left in the first. They would go 3 and out and punt from their own 38. So now Mississippi State took over after the punt with about 8 minutes left in the first. The ball on their own 41. And on 3rd and 8 from the 43, Dak Prescott was sacked by Roderick Rook Chung, and so now it will be a 3 and out. After that, the punting unit came out to punt from the 37, so Georgia Tech would take over on their own 12 with about 6.5 left to play in the first quarter. They would bring the ball up towards midfield, and they would cross over into Mississippi State territory. It's a first down on the Mississippi State 41. Justin Thomas dropped back, and he had Darren Waller for a 41-yard touchdown. It was now 14-0 Georgia Tech over Mississippi State. So now the Bulldogs would take over on their own 25 after the kickoff with about 1.5 left in the first quarter. They would bring the ball to midfield and into Georgia Tech territory. They had a 1st and 10 from the 40, and an incomplete pass brought the first quarter to a close. So after 1 quarter of play, the score was Georgia Tech 14, Mississippi State 0. So now to open up the second quarter was 2nd and 10 from the 40 for the Bulldogs. And Prescott hit Darren Wilson for a 9-yard reception to bring the ball to the 31. Then Prescott picked up 2 yards in the first down at the 29. They would bring the ball into the red zone, but their drive stalled on the 15, and out would come Sobiesk to kick a 32-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and the Bulldogs put their first points on the scoreboard with the score now Georgia Tech 14, Mississippi State 3. So now the Yellow Jackets take over on their own 35 after the kickoff with about 13 minutes left before halftime. They went 3 and out on the possession and ended up punting from their own 40. So now Mississippi State would take over on their own 45 with about 11 minutes left in the second quarter. And on first down, Dak Prescott hit Joe Morrow for a 32-yard reception, a first down to Georgia Tech 23. Prescott then went back to Morrow. He picked up 14 yards and a first down. They made a 1st and goal on the 9. And on 2nd and goal from the 5, Dak Prescott ran it in for the touchdown from 5 yards out. It was now a 4-point game with the score Georgia Tech 14, Mississippi State 10. So now after the kickoff, Georgia Tech would take over on their own 25 with about 10 minutes left before halftime. They would bring the ball to midfield and into Mississippi State territory. They were faced with a 3rd and 14 from the Mississippi State 33. Justin Thomas dropped back to pass. He was intercepted by Beniquez Brown. And so now the Bulldogs would take over on their own 25 with about 7 minutes still left in the second quarter. They ended up bringing the ball to midfield and into Georgia Tech territory. On 1st and 10 from the Georgia Tech 43, Robinson ran 12 yards, and then a penalty, a face mask against Georgia Tech, would make it a first down in the red zone for the Bulldogs, but their drive would stall on the 13, and out would come Sobiesk to kick a 30-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and it was now a 1-point game with the score Georgia Tech 14, Mississippi State 13. So now the Yellow Jackets would take over on their own 18 after the kickoff with about 5 minutes left before halftime. They would bring the ball to midfield and into the red zone, and on 2nd and 9 from the 13, Justin Thomas ran it into the end zone from 13 yards out for the touchdown to extend the Yellow Jackets lead to 8 with the score Georgia Tech 21, Mississippi State 13. So now the Bulldogs to get the ball with about a half minute left before halftime. They had it on their own 28 after the kickoff. They actually got a false start penalty to move them back to the 23, and they picked up 11 yards on 2nd and 15. So now it's 3rd and 4 from the 34 after Prescott hit Johnson on that pass, and Robinson then picked up 10 yards on the ground. Now it was first down on the 44. Prescott then went to Wilson. He picked up 14, and now it was a first down on the 42. Both teams took a timeout. There was only 5 seconds on the clock, and Mississippi State, instead of going for a 59, 60-yard field goal, they decided, let's just go for it for one last play, throw it up in the air, a Hail Mary. Dak Prescott scrambling around. He tosses it up in the air, and it bounces off some hands and ends up in Fred Ross's hands for the 42-yard touchdown on the final play of the second half, or the first half, to bring us to the second half, rather, to put the Bulldogs within one with the score Georgia Tech 21, Mississippi State 20 going into intermission. So now to start off the second half, Georgia Tech would get the ball first. It was 1st and 10 on the 25 after the kickoff. Charles Perkins ran for 6 yards to make it 2nd and 4 from the 31. They gave it to Synjyn Days, and he ran it all the way 69 yards down the sideline for the touchdown to put the Yellow Jackets back up by 8 with the score Georgia Tech 28, Mississippi State 20. So now the Bulldogs would get the ball after the kickoff on their own 25. They would end up bringing it across midfield and into Georgia Tech territory. But then on 2nd and 11 from the 26, they got a holding penalty. Then a couple of incomplete passes would bring up 4th and 21 from the 36. And Prescott hit Darren Wilson. He picked up 17, but he was 4 yards shy of the first down, so they turned the ball over on downs. So now the Yellow Jackets would take over on their own 19 with about 11 minutes left in the third. They would end up bringing the ball to midfield and then into Mississippi State territory. It's 1st and 10 from the 32, and Justin Thomas runs it in from 32 yards out for the touchdown to extend the Yellow Jackets' lead to 15 with the score Georgia Tech 35, Mississippi State 20. So now the Bulldogs take over on their own 11 after the kickoff with about 8 minutes left in the third. There was a penalty for holding on the return, and that's why they were backed up against their own end zone. They would end up bringing the ball to midfield, though, as they just kept getting first downs. And then on 2nd and 4, though, from the Georgia Tech 45, Dak Prescott was dropped, and he fumbled the ball. Jamal Golden forced the fumble. It was recovered by Roderick Rook-Kachung. So now Georgia Tech would take over on their own 48 with less than 7 minutes left in the third. They'd bring the ball into Mississippi State territory and down into the red zone when Charles Perkins ran at 21 yards on 1st and 10 from the 39 to make it 1st and 10 on the 18. Synjyn Days then ran for 3 yards, and on 2nd and 7 from the 15, Justin Thomas ran it in with a 15-yard touchdown run, and it was now a 22-point lead for the Yellow Jackets with the score Georgia Tech 42, Mississippi State 20. So now the Bulldogs take over on their own 15 with a little over 4 minutes left in the third, and they would bring the ball to midfield and into Georgia Tech territory all the way down to the red zone. And it was 1st and 10 from the 11, and Josh Robinson ran for 4 yards, and that brought the third quarter to a close. So after 3 quarters of play, the score was Georgia Tech 42, Mississippi State 20. So now to begin the fourth quarter, the Bulldogs had it on the Georgia Tech 7. It was 2nd and 6, and Dak Prescott dropped back and hit Darren Wilson for the 7-yard touchdown. It was now Georgia Tech 42, Mississippi State 27. So now the Yellow Jackets would take over on the Mississippi State 46 after the kickoff. They went for an onside kick, the Bulldogs did, and Georgia Tech recovered, and that's why they had the ball in Mississippi State territory. They would bring the ball down into the red zone. They were faced with a 3rd and goal from the 4, and Synjyn Davis ran it in from 4 yards out for the touchdown. It was now Georgia Tech 49, Mississippi State 27. So now the Bulldogs would take over with 12 minutes left in this game. They had it on their own 25. And they would end up bringing it into Georgia Tech territory all the way down to the 5-yard line. But they were faced with a 4th and goal, and an incomplete pass would turn the ball over on downs. So now Georgia Tech would take over on their own 6-yard line with less than 10 minutes left to play. And after 9 plays, they ended up punting from their own 38. So now Mississippi State would take over on their own 48 after the punt with less than 4 minutes on the clock in the 4th. They would get into Georgia Tech territory on 1st and 10 from the 12. Dak Prescott dropped back, and he hit Darren Wilson in the corner of the end zone on a perfect pass and a beautiful catch by Wilson on the 12-yard touchdown. It was now Georgia Tech 49, Mississippi State 34. So now the Bulldogs tried another onside kick. Georgia Tech recovered, and they would just give the ball to Synjyn Days, and they would end up running out the clock. So Mississippi State ended up taking a timeout, but they weren't able to stop them as they picked up a first down. And the final score, Georgia Tech 49, Mississippi State 34. So the Yellow Jackets win the Orange Bowl as they come in and upset the Bulldogs. And in this game for Georgia Tech, Justin Thomas was 7 for 12 with 125 yards passing, 1 touchdown and 1 interception. He had 14 carries for 121 yards and 3 touchdowns. Dak Prescott was 33 for 51 with 153 yards, 3 touchdowns and an interception. He had 15 carries for 47 yards. The leading rusher in the game was Synjyn Days. He had 21 carries for 171 yards and 3 touchdowns. And Zach Lasky had 63 yards off of 10 carries. Charles Perkins had 7 carries for 59 yards. And leading rusher for the Bulldogs was Josh Robertson with 13 carries for 75 yards. Leading receiver in the game, which Joe Murrow of the Bulldogs. He had 6 receptions for 117 yards. Ronnie Wilson had 105 yards off of 9 receptions and 2 touchdowns. Fred Ross had 6 receptions for 102 yards. And for the Yellow Jackets, Darren Waller had 5 receptions for 114 yards and a touchdown. Each team had a pick, as Beniquez Brown had a pick for the Bulldogs and Chris Milton had one for the Yellow Jackets. But in this game, Georgia Tech pretty much dominated. The Bulldogs made it interesting in the 4th, but the Yellow Jackets hold on to win by double digits with the final score: Georgia Tech 49, Mississippi State 34.